Hey, what's up, what's up, what's up? I really don't usually make videos like this, but I've been doing a lot of research the past year. Research that's kind of led up to knowing about World War III and the Russia-Ukraine conflict months before it happened. And I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Daryl Omar Shabazz. I'm a political science student from Kent State University. I ended up leaving Kent State University to pursue a career as an author and to honestly just kind of get out of the political atmosphere and political landscape, because the more that I learned about American politics, I never wanted to be involved within doing a video like this or talking about American politics. But having spent so much of my life before college studying politics, so much of my life in college studying politics, and so much of my life out of college studying politics, you become aware of, I guess, what I want to talk about today. So I was just sitting in the shower, thinking about this over and over again. And, I saw something for Prager. I saw two things. One was a commercial yesterday about a mother talking to her kid about socialism. But in the talks about socialism, they're showing the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx, and the kid is saying all this rhetoric against communism, capitalism, whatever. And then a PragerU thing today. And PragerU is again bashing communism, bashing socialism. Let me first start off by saying that I am not a socialist. I went to a socialist convention during college. This kind of led to my leaving, and I learned a lot from them. I would quite honestly say that, but I also learned that socialism and communism is not a solution to anything. So if you're aware of that and you already know it, because there's no, if you did not know it, there's no use to be in rhetoric against communism or socialism. Let those that believe in it, because that's how ideologies work. They work in a system of belief, what people think upon, not necessarily always what they do and act upon, because that's when you need politics and government to intervene, because that's the action part. But as far as what someone wants to believe, there shouldn't be any of this infighting or any of this ideological conflict over all these cults that exist today. People call them political parties, they call it the LGBT movement, they call it Black Lives Matter, they call it, there's a lot of ideological cults today. And the danger in the situation that we're currently in is that people are far more wanting to prove the prowess and the power of their ideological cult. So they'll attack members of another group. You'll have neo-Nazis kidnapping black men, killing them on the side of the street. You'll have neo-Nazis getting a Tinder date with a black woman and then killing her inside of his apartment with his buddies. And then there's no foul play because the police is also involved with the KKK and the neo-Nazi movement. You have to step away, I would say, for certain, because the media lies to you 9 times out of 10. The media is there to prevent grand riots from breaking out. When there are grand riots breaking out, the media is there to send people back home. There's a place for it. The place for it is not getting all your information, because even within the media broadcast, there's only but so much. You can call it disinformation or fake news or something like that, but it's an unfair criticism, because there's only but so much that they could possibly tell you within the time frame that they have to tell you. If you want to learn more about Russia and Ukraine, do what I did. Look at documentaries. Look into the research there. Look at the people who live in Russia and live in Ukraine and get their opinion and get their perspective. There's a lot of first-hand sources that you can utilize to this very day, if not more than ever, that you can utilize to this day, because a lot of scholars have YouTube channels, a lot of scholars have their own websites, their own books available in Kindle. A lot of the resources and informations are out there and it's available. This really primarily gets me to my fucking point. Americans are the least educated people on the planet. Americans don't really understand enough about their own country. They do not understand enough about their own history. And just like I told you, with the media, the college and the high school system is even worse. is that there's really only but so much they can really teach you and so much they can really include within the 12 to 15 week span of time that they have you, and they're attempting to grade you and examine you for all these things. At the end of the day, you're being judged on how well you can take a test. I didn't have any issue with that aspect of the system. My aspect was more so in one of my political science teachers dying the second day of class, and I really just did not get my head on straight after Phil Hammer passed away. But because it just kind of made me see how meaningless a lot of this stuff is. We spend this time arguing and fighting. People arguing about capitalism, which is a failed system and doesn't work. People arguing about socialism, which is a failed system and does not work. If you want any proof of this, Henry Ford was a capitalist, and he basically brought about the modern age of slavery that we all live in today. People living on the plantation well after the abolition of slavery. People being in debt to their frickin' employer, spending 100 hours a week working. And a lot of what we codify as masculinity has nothing to do with masculinity. It has everything to do with Satanism and slavery. The modern man that a lot of these people seek is a satanic slave. There's really nothing outside of that. Guys that go to church, guys that have good morality, guys that have good sense in their shoulders, they're labeled as boring or crazy because they're not going to spend 100 hours of their life working themselves to death for nothing. Capitalism has failed us. Capitalism has failed us for over 100 years. Capitalism is... The system of slavery is a system of capitalism. So instead of calling it slavery, they call it capitalism so they can sleep at night. There's no real arguments against that. The same people who did not want to abolish slavery are the same people to this day that don't want to abolish America as a capitalist country. It does not matter how many people starve. It does not matter to them how many people are unemployed. It doesn't matter how many people are homeless. It doesn't matter how many children are starving or homeless. We've gotten to a point where people's ideology is more important to them than the reality that they live in. The ideas that people have in their head, which within the age of social media, are literally just their own ideas and their own thoughts, and you never have to bring those details to surface for criticism or judgment if you're afraid of being criticized or judged. Or you can only and exclusively bring these ideas to other people that agree with you, where they cannot be criticized and cannot be judged. The only criticism you're going to get is with any outside perspective and any outside idea, and that's exactly what we're dealing with today. You have people physically moving within America to certain cities and certain regions that agree with them. People aren't being trained on how to handle disagreement. They're not being trained on how to handle other perspectives. So when it gets to arguments, when it gets to disagreements, you see people cutting each other off for the rest of your life, which is like social murder, or you have people fighting to the death, which is actual realistic homicide and murder. We're stuck within this system because this is the system that has existed. I would probably predate it to America, because the majority of the issues that you're facing within the American system were pre-existent within the European system for over 1,000 years before America even existed. You're not dealing with people who are evolving in their concept and creating better arguments. You're dealing with people who manipulate anyone who they think isn't as smart as them. They give false information to anyone who disagrees with them. And then honestly, to the people that agree and think the same way that they do, it's a cult. And as soon as you start reading other authors, you start reading other subjects, you start thinking other things, you face the same issues within the Republican Party or Democratic Party or the LGBT movement as you would face in a cult. And that is honestly what's controlling America today. People are very worried about secret societies, and you should be to some extent, because those are more powerful, bigger cults. But what you really need to be afraid of is the idea of political parties within themselves. Political parties was not the design of... There's a reason why the door was locked. It's not the design and purpose of American politics. American politics were not created to sustain two polar opposite perspectives. And it's to a point where it's nonsensical. Let's talk about this for a second. The Democratic Party was created to maintain slavery. That is the only reason that this party exists. Anything past the date 1901, discussing anything about democracy and Democrats, it doesn't exist. It's not real. It's not the Democratic Party. It's what remains because the fight for slavery remains. So the fight for cheap labor, the fight for free labor, internships, the fight for an overclass versus an underclass still exists to this very day. The Republican Party. The Republican Party was only created to end slavery. That's the extent of American politics and political issues. So once we move past 1886 with these issues, what you have is the continued fight for slavery because these people were not yet free. You know, the abolition that we learned, the Emancipation Proclamation that many of you are taught, it has everything to do with eradicating slavery on the basis of skin color, creed, but it has nothing to do with eradicating the slavery that the European immigrants were already going through, which led them to fight to end slavery for the Africans and the Hebrews and the Native Americans that lived there. You know, the Europeans were also enslaved, but you have a very useful rhetoric within white people that at least you're not black. Great. But when you're still facing the exact same issues that black Americans are facing, and black Americans are lapping white Americans, I'm talking about in the 1880s. In the 1880s, you still had black people going to college. You still had black people having occupations and jobs within the American government political system. You still have black inventors, black scientists, you have a very thriving black life within America, even during slavery. But when you keep teaching people, at least you're not black, that's not scientific fact. That's not reason and logic. It's manipulation. And at a certain point, it's not manipulation against black people, because from what I see in my life experience, segregation is still very prevalent. The only people that really integrated were the black people that wanted to be white. They wanted that white badge of approval. And then once they moved to the suburbs, a good number of them fucking hate it because the white culture around them did not adapt to accepting black people and loving black people and understanding black people. The only black people that are surviving in those positions are the black people that act like they're white people. But then I have to ask you, what happens to the white people that don't act like white people? What happens to the poor white people? What happens to undereducated white people? What happens to white people within the working class or within the working poor class or the lower middle class? To have the dynamic when America set up for yourself in which, well, I'm not black, so I don't have to focus on black issues, it guides you to where we are at today in 2022, that the majority of black issues are white issues that were never fixed. They were just moved on to black people. And that you have now in 2022 is you have a great number of black people that will never be affected by any American policy. They will never be affected by any American police force, quite honestly with you, because they're too rich and they are too powerful. And if you do try to trample with them, if you do try to test them, you are going to pay far more severely than that black person ever would. That's the reality that you live in. But you're still raised to believe that black people are being hunted down by the police. You still have all this rhetoric and all this ideology that two sane, logical, rational ideologies that were meaningful and purposeful in existence would never even, if you were an intelligent person, you could not honestly tolerate any of the things that Democrats say, because it all just seems like madness. The idea that you're going to build a stronger nation by shipping in all this immigrant labor without even taking care of the people that currently live here is a joke. Why? if people living here are already in a tough situation, why would you put more people in to make it tougher? It doesn't make any fucking sense. There's so many countries that people could go to, countries way closer to where they're currently at, that if you really gave a shit about people, you would use the Federal Reserve to fix second world nations and third world nations to create better conditions for people. But we enslaved the second world nations and we put all the Asians to work. And then they come to America working their asses off, and we want to applaud them for being the ideal citizen or the ideal minority or some shit like that. Asian people aren't coming to America to fucking work their balls off and die. They're coming to get educations and send their money back to Asia. African people don't come to America to work themselves to death and die. They come to America to ship their money. So why are you inviting people into your country if you're a Democrat and you give a shit, if you really cared about America versus your cult? You would see a lot of flaws in people only coming to your country to gain the resources, to gain the knowledge, to gain the riches and wealth, and then give this shit away to somebody else across the fucking world. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any fucking sense. You wouldn't have a relationship with the woman that you're dating, and you're saying, babe, let me take you out to eat. Babe, let's go do this museum. And she's like, no, it's okay. Just give me the money for it, and I'll take my girlfriends. That's Democrats in the year 2022. They couldn't win the battle for slavery because Democrats don't have a moral advantage. They're literally if you look at the Greek and Latin meaning of being a Democrat, you worship Satan. You're a Satanist. It's all right. You can admit it. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. And it makes a lot more sense with the principles that they stand for and how they operate to manipulate and deceive people. But no. The Democratic Party is literally a party of Satanists. They worship the devil. Republicans, on the other hand, it's like they resist everything that has to do with common sense. Why is this? Well, again, the Republican Party doesn't have any strong principles or ideology. They only existed here to end slavery. So once you move past 1886, what you had was a lot of poor blacks and poor whites unifying, culminating their resources, culminating their knowledge. That's why a lot of black people still live in the South or move to the South, and they started the Fusion Party. Why did this not work out? This didn't work out because the power system of white supremacy was threatened to the simple fact that these white Democrats, these white elite landowners had gotten so used to abusing the immigrants that come to this country. Once the European immigrants that came here started talking to the African people that were here, we outnumber them 100 to 1. There's only one landowner. There's 50 people to 100 people working the field, working the fucking operations of the place. And if the poor white people get together with the poor black people, the rich white people don't stand a chance. That's the simple, honest truth as to why America functions the way that it does. And that's why this system still exists to this day. The Republican Party should not exist. It should call itself something very different because these Republicans are acting as if they stand upon something deeper and they stand upon something more historic, and they really don't. You kind of failed at ending slavery, and then all you Republicans, got wrapped back into slavery as well. I don't really care. If you're working for somebody else, you're more than likely a slave. If you're struggling to pay your bills, you're more than likely in a system of American feudalism. And that's what you have in 2022. You have a feudalistic system that refuses to call itself that because there's too much money. And these ideological cults brainwashing people and manipulating people and controlling the thought processes of these people. There's too much money. If you can get all these poor white people to believe that they need to support corporatism and capitalism, and you've been working on that idea far before the end of slavery, you've been working on that idea since the 1700s, what are you going to... We're really like right back to square one when the British held control over America. All the wars that you fought, all the bloodshed that was lost, what does it have to do if you're not investing back into your citizens for an American enlightenment, for an American Renaissance, for Americans to have that investment within culture and ideology and education, to actually understand what is going on versus what is most beneficial to the landowners and the elites and the people that own the corporations. Because that's really it. You go to college to become a better tool for a corporation. Guess who has did that? Slaves. You would send your slaves off to a college or a trade school to become a better useful slave for you, because that is the only purpose and the only process that they see you in life. They only see American citizenship as slaves. This was made most important by Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon took the American dollar off the gold standard. What did he replace it with? The petrodollar? No, he replaced it with fucking labor. He replaced it with a credit system. He replaced it with modern slavery. And that wasn't in the 1800s. That was in the late 1900s. That was in the mid-1900s to the late 1900s. And then he left. What did Bill Clinton do? Bill Clinton set a system in place for Americans that all these black people are now going to be fucking in prison and in jail for a mandatory minimum. He gets his dick sucked in the white, and then he's gone. These guys come in, they fuck up the country, and then they leave. And then when you do that process over and over again, you make such a confusing turn of leadership. And I'm not really sure if there's any better form of leadership, because again, I'm an American citizen. I wasn't educated past that point of what comes after a presidency, what comes after democracy, what comes after capitalism. You had capitalism since Adam Smith until today. It did not work because Adam Smith didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. Now what do you have? What do you have? You have a giant mess. You have a country where 40%, at least the number was at least 40% of Americans don't have more than $400 saved. And you're supposed to be a capitalist. You're sitting in a situation where over 20%, 1/5 of the population is unemployed, and the numbers are growing because all these corporations are laying people off, or businesses are dying, so these people are unemployed, either by force or by no fault of their own, quite certainly. You have a record number of evictions, you have a record number of homelessness, and all these issues keep rising, they keep getting worse. But, once again, full circle back to my point, you're not dealing with human beings anymore. You're dealing with cult members. Anyone who you see that is still a Democrat is a cult member. Anyone that you see that is still a Republican is a cult member. These people are part of a cult. The LGBT movement is a cult. These things are ideological cults. What is the danger of that? The danger to that is that a cult member does not have any loyalty to you. They only have loyalty to their cult members. And even then, quite honestly, they really only have any sense of loyalty to whoever their cult leader is. They don't even care about the other cult members that are there. Because again, once you start introducing new ideas, once you start expanding your mindset first beyond the barriers and limitations of that cult, and that's why people are Democrats and Republicans or in these kind of weird, you can be gay without teaching kids about transsexuality. I honestly think that you can be gay and never bring the point up to anybody, and you would still live a great fucking life. Should you hide the fact of being gay? Fucking no, you shouldn't have to hide your sexuality from anybody. Should your sexuality be the most important part of your character? No, that's just as bad as making your gender the most important part of your character, or making your skin color the most important part of your character, or making your ideological cult the most important part of your character. Your meritocracy is very important. Do you take care of your family? That's very fucking important. Those things are very, very interesting to me. But as far as all this other stuff going on in America, you don't really have anyone that you can talk to about these things because everyone else is waiting to be told. They don't have conversations. They don't have deep talks. They have a lot of information that they have never been given, that they don't know where to find it, and the people in power are perfectly happy like that. They're perfectly happy without you ever questioning capitalism a day in your life. You can't pay your bills. You're living paycheck to paycheck. And the system that is built to keep blaming yourself, to keep blaming yourself, to keep blaming whoever's not bringing enough money. But you have rising food prices, you have rising cost of gas, but nothing is rising to meet that. There are no jobs raising their wages to match the price of inflation. There are no jobs raising their wages to match how outrageous housing is. But what you do have, and this is the only thing you quite literally have, and this is my final point and I'm done, because I'm not sure if I'm really articulating myself as well as I want to. I'm not really sure if I'm getting the point that I want to. But what you do have out of all that is that you have people that are so loyal to their ideological cult and cult leaders. They don't care about anybody else. They don't care if you're starving. They don't care about abortion. They don't care about homelessness. They don't care about orphanages. They don't care about DIFUS. They don't care about drug offenders. They don't care about innocent people in jail. They don't care about anything that disproves their points. They don't acknowledge anything that disproves capitalism. They don't acknowledge anything that disproves socialism. They don't acknowledge anything that disproves white supremacy or black inferiority. You're dealing with people who are more loyal to whatever makes them feel good, whatever ideological cult gives them a sense of purpose, than the reality that they live in. And that is the danger of this country. That is why America is falling apart. It's not the real news that is there. If you're listening to The Guardian, if you're listening to Russell Brand, I struggle to call Russell Brand real news, but it's a lot more reliable than a lot of other people out there. You're struggling with people who simply they would rather just remain inside of their ideological comfort zone. I don't want to keep calling it a cult and insult, but I called it a cult this entire point so far, so if you're insulted, you're insulted. But they're stuck inside their ideological comfort zones, and it doesn't matter what facts, what truth, what legitimacy you bring to them, that cancel culture is not the right way to handle sex offense. Because when you run across innocent people, you're destroying their entire livelihood. There's a reason why we stopped your uncles and your grandfathers from lynching people in the middle of the street. Because they were abducting innocent black men, and they were never actually addressing the real issues of crime going on. And they still do this shit because they're racist white supremacists. That's not a truth. That's not a reality. That's their ideological cult. And they're not building that cult off of truth. They're not building that cult off of research. They invented an entire science of eugenics to prove their own point, and that's what we do today. We create African studies, we create gender studies, we create all these false, fake sciences to prove points that don't need to be proven, but the real issues, the real struggles that humanity is going through, we'll never be able to address, because we're not looking at people in terms of their humanity. We're not looking at life in terms of humanity, of reality, my apologies. We're literally just stuck with people who find their ideology more important than your life. Them being right about abortion is more important than childcare coming to those kids or universal childcare. These people being right about same-sex marriage is more important than all these gay people that are struggling to have real relationships with heterosexual people because there's become such an animosity and such a tremendous backlash. It's even getting so deep that some of these LGBT people are having a great struggle within the LGBT movement because it's supporting pedophilia, because it's supporting, like, literally raping and molesting kids. How some of these people theoretically became LGBT. So it's like if someone has that trauma of being sexually abused as a child, and now you want to support and help the sexual pedophiles, the sexual fucking predators, but you also want to stand behind cancel, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. We need to reach a point where truth is more important than ideology. where reality is more important than ideology, and humanity is more important than ideology. But I'm not sure if we're ever going to reach that point.